In the year 1147, the German king Conrad III marched with a Crusader army through the sun-baked plains of Anatolia to rescue the Latin kingdoms of the Outremer from the grip of the Zengid threat. However, the Sultan of Rum, Mesut I, did not intend to just let the Crusaders pass freely, setting an ambush for the Christians near the town of Dorylaeum. Before long, the crusading force came into view, and the Sultan set off his trap. Gradually, as the Crusader contingents began to divide, they encountered contingents of Turkic horsemen, who began raining down arrows upon them. The Germans would now have to fight for their lives. The Second Battle of Dorylaeum and the First Battle of the Second Crusade was about to begin. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us, we couldn't be doing it without your help. After the siege of Edessa came to an end, the victorious Zengi spared its Armenian and Jewish population, but put its Latin Christians to death. With the lands up to the Euphrates secured, Zengi made preparations for his next campaign onto Damascus in 1145, which ultimately failed. This refocused Zengi's priorities on consolidating his gains in northern Iraq and Syria. Fate, however, would not be so kind to the Islamic hero. In 1146, while besieging a rebel fortress of Kalash-Jabbar, Zengi held a lavish party, during which he became heavily drunk. After the feast was over, the warlord saw that one of his eunuchs of Frankish origin, named Urankash, drank from his cup. Angered by the eunuch's audacity, he ordered Urankash to be executed by dawn, after which he fell asleep in his tent. In an act of desperation, Urankash moved to Zengi's quarters and stabbed the Seljuk warlord to death. After Zengi's death, the Zengid domains were divided among 2 of his sons, Nur ad-Din, who governed Aleppo, and Saif ad-Din Ghazi, who took power in Mosul. Seeing Zengi's death as an opportunity, Count Choslan attempted to retake Edessa, but this attempt was repulsed by the 2 Zengid sons, who, contrary to Crusader expectations, united against the Latins, rather than fight amongst themselves. Meanwhile, the situation in the Kingdom of Jerusalem was looking dire. Queen Melisande intended to use Jerusalem's alliance with Damascus, currently ruled by Anur, to make a joint counterstrike on the Zengid's domains. The only factor that the Queen Mother didn't consider was her co-ruling son, Baldwin III, who was willing to undermine his mother's authority. Baldwin successfully convinced most of Jerusalem's army to aid Damascus's rebellious governor of the Hauran region, Al-Tuntash, in exchange for the strategic fortress of Bosra. This venture proved to be a disaster, as Anur avoided battle with the Latins until the attackers began suffering from starvation and were forced to retreat. Without Baldwin's support, Al-Tuntash's rebellion ended quickly. Baldwin's doomed venture cost Jerusalem dearly, for after being betrayed by his Latin allies, Anur reluctantly decided to ally himself with Nur ad-Din. Overall, the loss of Edessa and the Crusader states' inability to respond properly to the Zengid threat made it necessary to call for another crusade. On the 1st of December 1145, Pope Eugenius III announced a papal bull, known as Quantum Praedecessoris. This document encouraged the European knights to aid Jerusalem and the enslaved Christians to the east by promising absolution from sins to any participant. Interestingly, unlike Urban II's call for the First Crusade around 50 years earlier, the document itself did not set a clear goal for the crusade, which would later cause problems for the involved crusaders. Eugenius's bull was initially met with little enthusiasm. Eugenius's authority as pope was undermined by the Commune rebellion in Rome, led by Arnold of Brescia, which had driven him into exile in Viterbo. Moreover, the pope had another powerful enemy in King Roger II of Sicily, who openly challenged his legitimacy. However, when the papal bull reached King Louis VII of France, he gladly answered the papal call. When the 25-year-old king announced his intention to go on crusade, the French court was divided on this matter. Only a few nobles, led by the Bishop of Langres, agreed to the idea. The majority, represented by Abbot Suger, opposed the king's intentions. They were concerned that the king's long absence from France could potentially open the monarchy to internal and external threats. Undeterred, Louis still had one ace up his sleeve, and decided to consult with one of the most prominent orators and intellectuals of his times, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux was a known figure in the Catholic world. After his appointment as an abbot of a Cistercian monastery, Bernard distinguished himself by reforming his monastic order and saving the church from the disastrous papal election of 1130. Consequently, Saint Bernard managed to establish connections with the European elite, turning him into a pope maker. Saint Bernard was also a staunch supporter of the crusading movement. Invited by the French king to Vézelay on Easter of 1146, the Cistercian abbot delivered a fiery speech by rhetorically enriching the papal quantum praedicatories. The French royal court, together with crowds of commoners present, rose up in enthusiasm, crying for crosses. Things almost went south as many spectators rejoiced at Saint Bernard's performance, jumping on the wooden platform on which the Cistercian made his speech, which resulted in the platform's collapse. Luckily, no one was hurt or injured, which was only received as a miracle and a good omen for the coming expedition. The word quickly spread around the rest of France, and with further Bernard preaching, more tales of cures and miracles arose around the saint. It didn't take long before these stories began to circulate throughout all of Western Europe, and it didn't take long before Saint Bernard's call for crusade had reached the ears of the German king Conrad III. At first, Conrad wasn't interested in the crusade. Instead, in the hopes of receiving the imperial crown, he planned to cross the Alps to help restore the Pope's power in Rome. His concerns also related to internal disputes in the Holy Roman Empire. Despite being elected as King of the Germans, the opposing members of the Welf dynasty still plotted against Conrad. So, to nobody's surprise, Saint Bernard's first audience with the German king was coldly received. Nevertheless, the Abbot of Clairvaux didn't give up, and on the second meeting in Speyer, he tried his luck again. During the public sermon, Saint Bernard used his speech to famously envision Conrad on the Day of Judgment, and, acting as a Christ, asked the king directly, "O man, what is there that I should have done for you and did not do?" Ashamed by his ingratitude in defense of Christ, Conrad cried out loud and with tears in his eyes replied, "I am ready to serve him." Thus, the King of Germany too decided to go on crusade. Almost simultaneously, other calls were received from Iberia, as King Alfonso I of Portugal, King Alfonso VII of Castile, and Count of Barcelona, Ramon Berengar IV, became interested in spreading a crusading movement to fight against the Moors in Al-Andalus, but that is a tale for another time. Thus, due to the will of a single man, what was supposed to be a private venture of a French monarch became a fiery movement that sprung the entirety of Catholic Europe into action. At first glance, Pope Eugenius was very pleased with Bernard's successful promotion of the crusade. On the other hand, Eugenius feared Conrad's involvement in the crusade would allow his Sicilian enemy, Roger II, to operate against the papacy back in Italy freely. At first, the Sicilian king wanted to participate in the crusade, and due to possessing an enormous navy, was capable of transporting crusaders by sea to the Holy Land. The problem was that Roger simultaneously waged war not only with the Pope and the Holy Roman Empire, but also with the Byzantines. This meant that adding Roger to the crusade could, from the Byzantine Greek perspective, put the Crusaders' motives into question. Moreover, Roger had claims to the Principality of Antioch through his de Hauteville bloodline. Thus, Roger's involvement was discarded. Meanwhile, preparations in France and the Holy Roman Empire began to take place. The French contingent, led by Louis VII and his wife Eleanor, had many nobles who accompanied the royal couple. Additionally, the Count of Savoy, Amadeus III, also agreed to follow the king, but promised to catch up later in Constantinople. Meanwhile, the German contingent consisted of Swabians, led by Conrad's nephew and successor Frederick, Bavarians and Austrians, followed by the Duke of Bavaria and Margrave of Austria, Henry II Jasomirgott, and forces of Lorraine and Franconia, commanded by Stephen, Bishop of Metz, and Henri, Bishop of Toul. A huge part of the army also included allied Slavic contingents from the eastern borders of the empire, such as the Bohemian Duke Vladislaus II and one unnamed Polish duke. Modern scholars estimate that each crusading army could number up to 20,000 men, not including their servants, a very impressive army size for the era. The initial plan was for both armies to meet near Constantinople, from where they would jointly move through Anatolia and reach the Outremer. The Pope had already sent emissaries to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos, informing him about the coming help to the east. Although glad of the Latins' willingness to help Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Basileus didn't really need their assistance as much as his predecessor Alexius Komnenos did. With that said, the Seljuks of Rum and Danishmenids were still a threat to Byzantine holdings in Anatolia, so any military prospects might be helpful. By the end of May 1147, King Conrad's Crusader host went out from Nuremberg and continued its march to the east, leaving the French Crusader army behind. It took more than a month of further preparations and talks with the Pope before King Louis VII departed from the Abbey of Saint-Denis on the 8th of July 1147, trying to catch up with the German king. After marching from Nuremberg to Ratisbon, the German army entered the Kingdom of Hungary in June. Though Hungary was Catholic, its king, Geisa II, was unfriendly to the German king. Just a year earlier, Geisa had fought with the Bavarians and Austrians, and thus did not trust the Germans. Furthermore, Geisa had other reasons for being afraid of foreign armies in his territory. A pretender from the Arpad dynasty named Boris had claims to the Hungarian throne, and possessed many connections in the Holy Roman Empire. Despite the tensions, King Geisa II allowed Conrad's hosts to pass through his territory, though probably not without papal guarantees. While marching through Hungary, King Conrad was met with the Byzantine embassy led by Demetrius Macrembolites and an Italian named Alexander of Gravin. Emperor Manuel was well aware of Conrad's plans and demanded an oath of non-injury on imperial territory. Conrad agreed, and thus the Byzantine embassy led the Crusaders to cross the empire's border at Branicevo. The Germans passed through Niš and Sofia without any major setbacks, as Emperor Manuel ordered the local governor, Michael Brannis, to prepare markets for German arrival. The problems started as the Crusader host reached the outskirts of Philippopolis. There, during one day of rest, a group of German pilgrims misinterpreted the jokes of a local juggler, interpreting his tricks as sorcery and killing him on the spot. The angered townsfolk rallied for their favourite trickster and started to launch guerrilla warfare against the Germans. An immediate distrust between the Latins and the Greeks soon followed, compelling both sides towards further retaliation. Emperor Manuel had originally intended to host the Crusaders in Constantinople, but upon hearing reports of the Germans' violence, he instead sought to reroute Conrad's troops through the Hellespont. Dissatisfied with such a proposal, Conrad declined the offer and continued the march on Constantinople, so Manuel sent an army to follow the Germans. Tensions reached their boiling point when both armies reached Adrianople, where a group of locals snuck up and murdered one of the German knights. In response, a group of Swabian knights, led by Frederick, burned down a nearby monastery. Upon hearing of this, the Byzantine army readied for battle, only to be talked down by their commander, Prusch, at the last possible moment. In the end, it was not the Byzantines who punished the Germans, but the local weather. While the German army encamped on the Cherubachi plain, intense rains caused the Melis River to flood most of Conrad's encampment. Believing this to be a punishment from God, the Crusaders then marched all the way to Constantinople without any trouble. The Crusaders received their quarters near Philippatium Palace before the city walls. While this was happening, Emperor Manuel invited King Conrad to his palace and began talks with the German king. Although the Crusaders' actions had been troubling for both rulers, they both managed to maintain amicable relations due to their mutual hatred towards Roger II of Sicily, who was not only an enemy of the German king, but just so happened to have declared war on Byzantium too. The German and Byzantine rulers also had family ties, as Manuel's wife, Bertha von Sulzbach, was Conrad's sister-in-law. The Empress herself played a key role in peaceful talks between both rulers, as new reports began to mount over Crusaders pillaging in the countryside near the city. Though the Roman Emperor managed to strengthen relations with Conrad, he didn't intend for both crusading armies to meet. So Komnenos politely insisted that the German king cross his army to Anatolia as soon as possible. By throwing lavish gifts at the Crusaders and promising to help the Germans whenever they needed, Conrad agreed to Manuel's proposal, thus altering the Crusades' initial plans. Rather than wait for the arrival of the French, the Germans would now march into the Holy Land on their own. As promised, the Byzantine navy helped the German Crusaders sail through the Bosphorus to Chalcedon. In the midst of preparations, part of a French vanguard made up of French-speaking Lorrainers reached Constantinople and found the German departure shocking, as it jeopardized the initial plan of a joint Crusader army. The French Lorrainers also counted on German Crusaders to share their rations with them. Whether due to language differences or pure greed, the Germans not only refused, but also abandoned the French Lorrainers as soon as they landed in Asia Minor, much to the horror and protest of the German Lorrainers. Left on their own by the Germans in Constantinople, the Lorraine group would later antagonize the French Crusaders against Conrad's men. As soon as the German host landed in Chalcedon, King Conrad moved to Nicaea, where he had to decide between two potential routes through Anatolia. The first coastal route was longer and prone to raids from Rum Seljuks, but it also had more Byzantine strongpoints, whose garrisons could support the Crusaders. The second mainland route ran through hostile Seljuk territory, but it was much shorter than the previous one. Emperor Manuel tried to help Conrad by sending him a Varangian guide named Stefan, who advised Conrad to move along the Aegean coastline. At first, Conrad followed Stefan's advice, but just a day later he changed his mind and decided to move inland. Still trying to remain cautious, Conrad divided his force in two, leaving one Otto von Freising to march along the coast to Italia through Laodikia with a few men-at-arms and pilgrims, while the main part of the army would march inland through hostile territory. Conrad's motivations behind this decision are hotly debated, but the German king likely intended to quickly capture the Sultanate of Rum's capital at Iconium, where he could resupply his army. Conrad's march through Anatolia went smoothly for as long as the Crusaders marched through Byzantine territory, but the situation quickly changed when the Germans entered Seljuk territory. The Sultan of Rum, Mesud I, did not intend to just let the Crusaders pass freely. Another enemy to the Crusaders was the climate, as most of the German knights and footmen were not used to Anatolian heat. The starved and thirsty Crusaders began to split from the main army near the town of Dorylaeum in order to find provisions. That was exactly what Sultan Mesud was waiting for. From the 25th of October 1147, the divided Crusader contingents began to encounter Turkish horsemen raining down arrows on the unprepared Germans. King Conrad initially intended to repel small Muslim attacks, but as these detachments began to encounter heavier and heavier resistance, he realized his force had just entered into a trap. Soon shouts were heard from all sides as Mesud gathered his troops and charged into the German main force. At first, the German nobles intended to fight, but seeing his men exhausted and dehydrated, Conrad decided to call for an orderly retreat. Not every contingent followed the order and had to withstand Seljuk hit-and-run tactics on their own. During the withdrawal, the Seljuk cavalry constantly harassed the Germans with an unending mix of arrow barrages and melee charges, all the way until the Bosphorus coastline, inflicting heavy losses on the Germans, with reportedly only 1/10 of the army managing to escape from the battlefield. Even Conrad himself was wounded in the neck during the retreat. Beaten down and humiliated, Conrad retreated to Nicaea to resupply and wait for King Louis's French Crusader contingent to arrive. In our next video, we will focus on King Louis's route and his initiatives to lead the crusade through Anatolia. Is there any hope for the crusade to succeed after the German disaster at Dorylaeum? Will King Conrad and Louis swallow their pride and start to cooperate? How would Byzantium react to yet another Crusader army at its doors? And how will the Latin rulers of the Outremer react to the Crusaders' arrival? To find out the answer to these questions and more, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.